let's explore and set up the project structure of our React app. So let's start again by opening up index.html. So if we go to public and open up index.html, let's just take a closer look at this. As you can see, this is just a standard HTML5 document. It contains doc type HTML, head tag, title, body, and the main important portion of this is this div ID root tag. So why is there only one file? If we wanted to create an about page, would we create inside our public about.html and then create another React component? No. React creates single page applications, so our only point of entry will be this div tag with the ID of root. So this is where the React application will post every single portion once it's rendered. Now moving on to the source folder, we'll begin with index.js, since that is the starting point of the React app. We already looked at the main component, which is app, and the DOM element, which is controlled by React. So document.getElementById root. So this is the DOM element that is controlled by React. And both of these portions get passed into React DOM.render. So once that's done, the app component gets passed to the root element, which is located inside index.html right there. So a component is just a single portion of the UI. Once created, it can be used over and over again. So let's take a look at this diagram again. So we have our header component, we have our navigation component, we have these article components, and these article components are grouped together inside the section component, which means a component can also house other components. We also have this aside component, a footer component, and then this whole thing is going to be located in our main component, which for us will be that app component. So there are different types of components. There are stateless and stateful components. Stateless components, just think about them like functional components for the time being, and stateful components are going to be class components. So this is an example of a functional component. The functional component has to contain this return statement, and from the return we're going to return one single component right there. So this div tag, and within there we're going to contain everything else that we need. So now that we've seen an example of a functional component, what is a class-based component? So all it is just a component that is called class app, for example in this case, extends react.component. So once we have that, we cannot have this return statement just by itself right there. We actually need to have a method, and that method is called render. Within the render method, then we can have a return statement like that. And at that point, this is pretty much identical to that functional component. So if we go back and refresh our page, it's producing the exact same thing. And just to make sure that it is in fact doing that, let's go ahead and clear that and just write something like 1991 240SX, which is one of my favorite cars. And sure enough, boom, 1999 240SX right there. So those are functional and class-based components. Now, why are they called stateless and stateful? Later on, we're going to see that we're going to be able to do something like this. Have a state within our component that we're going to be able to use throughout. So in this case, let's say our state contains let's just keep it a car, and that car is going to be 1991 240SX. So then later on, within our component somewhere, we're going to be able to, let's just do a p tag right here, and say this.state.car. Save it. And there it is, 1991 240SX. If this was a functional component, we would not be able to do that. Let's also take a look at some other ways to do components. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this whole thing out. And we're going to do a constant, and we'll call it app. And within that constant, we'll just make this an object. And this constant is going to contain, well, let's just keep it a car. And 1990, 240 SX hatch. So once this is saved, it's going to return this component to wherever it's being used. So in this case, it's giving us an error because we're not actually doing something with it. We're going to look at something like this a little bit later on. But for the time being, I just wanted to show you guys the syntax of how that looks like. So we're going to go ahead, revert everything back. We're going to go ahead and clear the state. We're going to get out of this render method, bring it back to a functional component, resave it, and everything is working out fine. So this was a little bit of a deeper introduction to everything that we're going to be doing. The only other thing that I want to start doing is just basically setting up how we're going to be navigating through this stuff. So we're going to get rid of this logo from here because we really don't care about this logo. And as you can see right here, this logo is being rendered inside the image source. We're going to delete the image source tag. Actually, before we do that, another interesting thing that you might have seen is that tags that don't have a closing tag, that basically, before you had to do a self-closing tag in HTML, this is actually a requirement here. So you cannot just do something like that. As you can see, it throws all kinds of errors. So you do have to create a self-closing tag in JSX if it is a tag that doesn't contain a closing tag. So let's go ahead and remove that because we don't need it. We're going to go ahead and keep this app.css just because it centers everything and gives us this nice background. In index.js, we are also importing this index.css file. So what is this? It just gives a few different things for the overall document. So for our margin, we're setting it to 0. We're also setting this font family, and then for our code, we're setting this font family. Let's take a look back at index.js. So everything's going on right there. This is good. We're importing app from this app.js. So we don't need to modify this index.js any further. And we don't need to modify this index.css. In app.js, we're also importing app.css. Let's take a look at that. And that just contains a bunch of this stuff, to make everything properly formatted. We could delete some of these things, but we'll just keep it as is, just for time brevity's sake. And we'll start cleaning up some of this stuff on the inside. We'll keep this header, we'll keep this p tag, we'll even keep this a tag. So everything's pretty much good right here. Now all of the new components that we're going to be creating, we're going to be actually importing here inside app.js. Now we don't want to just store all of these components in here. What we want to do is create a components folder, and we'll do, just for time being, a quick test component. I'll just call it test.js. So in here, the first thing we're going to have to do is import React from React. And let's go ahead and do a constant, just because I showed you guys last time, but we really didn't even do it. So we'll do cars is equal to an object. And then we'll name this year is equal to 1990. Brand is equal to Nissan. And model is going to be 240 SX. Once we're done with that, we're going to need to export it. So we're going to export default cars. We can now go to app.js and we can import it. So import, what do we name it? We named it cars. So we import cars from, and where are we going to import it? So we're going to import it from components, from test. So now within our function, let's just do a console log. So console log cars. And let's see what that looks like. If we go back over here and we inspect, what we can do is open up our console, and it's going to say that we returned an object, and there's the object, a 1990 Nissan 240 SX. Now we could, within here, start doing some interesting stuff. So in order to display this object, we're going to have to open up curly braces, so we can say cars.name. Or actually, what do we name it? Cars.brand. So cars.brand, and let's go ahead and open it up, and there it is, Nissan. So it's just displaying Nissan, since we're basically accessing this object once we imported it. So I hope this is a little bit of a more of an understanding of what we're going to be doing. A lot of this stuff is going to make a lot more sense when we start going through with it deeper. So I suggest you guys watch this and then rewatch it, and you'll see that some of these videos that seem like they're way too rushed just start making a lot more sense. If you guys remember your first programming book, pretty much you didn't understand anything up until you got to the very end, and then you started reading over it again, and you said, oh, this is actually starting to, make a lot more sense than what is happening right now. So I promise eventually everything will make sense, but unfortunately we're just going to have to kind of brute force it through here and hope for the best. I'll be releasing these videos pretty regularly, hopefully every single day. So just keep up with it, and you should be fine towards the end.